Urgent question. Andy Burnham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department if she will make a statement on the process she went through and the papers she considered before reaching her decision not to proceed with an inquiry into the events at Orgreave in June 1984.
The Minister of State, Mr. Brandon Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Home Secretary announced her decision by way of a written ministerial statement yesterday, in which she explained her main reasons for deciding against instigating either a statutory inquiry or an independent review into the events at Orgreave coking plant. She has also written to the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, setting out the detailed reasons for her decision, and answered a number of questions in this House yesterday in response to an oral parliamentary question on this subject. In determining whether or not to establish a statutory inquiry or other review, the Home Secretary has considered a number of factors, reviewed a wide range of documents and spoken to members of the campaign. She came to the view that neither an inquiry nor a review was required to allay public concern at this stage, more than 30 years after the events in question. In doing so, she noted the following factors. Despite the forceful accounts and arguments provided by the campaigners about the effect that these events had on them, ultimately there were no deaths or wrongful convictions. In addition, the policing landscape and the wider criminal justice system have changed fundamentally since 1984, with significant changes in the oversight of policing at every level, including major reforms to criminal procedure, changes to public order policing and practice, stronger external scrutiny and greater local accountability. There are few lessons to be learned from a review of the events and practices of 3 decades ago. This is a very important consideration when looking at the necessity for an inquiry or independent review. Taking these considerations into account, we do not believe that establishing any kind of inquiry is required in the wider public interest or for any other reason.
Andy Burnham.
Mr. Speaker, the now Prime Minister invited Orgreave campaigners to submit a bid for an inquiry. She entered Downing Street talking about fighting burning injustices. So the House will understand why today so many people feel bitterly betrayed. Orgreave is one of the most divisive events in British social history. Given that there is evidence of unlawful conduct by police in relation to it, isn't it simply staggering that the Home Secretary has brushed away an inquiry as not necessary? And isn't it even more revealing that she wasn't prepared to come to this House today to justify her decision? I want to focus very specifically on her decision-making process, and I expect direct answers from the Minister. Before making her decision, did the Home Secretary recall files held by South Yorkshire Police and review them personally? I am told they never left Sheffield. Is that true? Did she consider in detail the new testimony that has emerged from police officers, particularly in relation to police statements? Did she review all relevant cabinet papers, such as the minutes of the meeting between Margaret Thatcher and Leon Britton, stamped secret, where the then Home Secretary says he wants to increase the rate of prosecutions of minors? Mr. Speaker, if she didn't do each and every one of these crucial things, won't many people conclude that a decision-making process was incomplete and therefore unsound? Yesterday, the Home Secretary promised to release the operational order. Will the Minister make sure that happens immediately? She also dismissed the link with Hillsborough. In doing so, is she dismissing the words of Margaret Aspinall, who believes that if the police have been properly held to account for their misdeeds in 1985, that the Hillsborough cover-up may never have happened? And are we to conclude from now on, Mr. Speaker, under this Home Secretary, that all manner of misdeeds will be left uninvestigated as long as there are, quotes, no deaths? Mr. Speaker, the Minister attended a positive meeting with campaigners in early September. We left it with a clear impression that it wasn't just whether there would be an inquiry, it was what form that inquiry was going to take. Indeed, the next day, the Times reported on its front page, Whitehall sources, saying that there would be an inquiry. Did the Home Secretary or her advisers authorise this briefing? And what changed after it was given? And in retrospect, does the Minister now concede that it was utterly cruel to give those campaigners false hope in that way? Mr. Speaker, yesterday we were hit with a bombshell, but today we dust ourselves down and we give notice to this government. We will never give up this fight.
We have noted, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, that the Home Secretary hasn't bothered to come before the House on this occasion to explain her decision. Most people in this House will remember the miners' strike. And what happened at Orgreave was totemic. But most people in the House will remember what Lord Stockton, the former Harold Macmillan, said in his maiden speech in the House of Lords about the miners' strike. He said this, former Harold Macmillan, "Breaks my heart to see what is happening in our country today. This terrible strike by the best men in the world who beat the Kaiser and Hitler's armies and never gave in." Does the Minister understand that the Home Secretary's decision is a slap in the face to the best men in the world and their friends and supporters? Does the Minister understand that the Orgreave campaigners feel they have been led up the garden path by the Home Secretary? And does the Minister understand that the Home Secretary's proposition that because there were no deaths, because there were no convictions, and the cases only collapsed because the collusion by South Yorkshire officers was revealed, but because there were no deaths and because there were no convictions, injustice must stand. On this side of the House, we say to ministers that we will not let this issue go and that injustice will not be allowed to stand.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much support the Home Secretary's decision. Unlike most of the people opposite bleating, I actually lived in South Yorkshire in a mining community during the time of the miners' strike and saw at first hand the bullying and intimidation that went on from the miners. People who didn't contribute to the strike fund had the windows done in. These people were trying to bring down the democratically elected government of the time, and they lost, and they need to get over it. Anyone only has to look at the TV pictures to see the violence.
Mr. Philip Davis.
People only have to look at the TV footage of that event to see the violence that the miners were carrying out against police officers. Can the Minister explain, if this matter is so important to the members opposite, why in 13 years they were in government they did absolutely nothing about this particular issue?